With Liquor Barn, you can shop your favorite bourbon, that perfect bottle of wine, or discover something new. To place an order for pickup or delivery, download the Liquor Barn app, visit liquorbarn.com, or call your nearest Liquor Barn location. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list for all the latest news on products, promotions, and events. Liquor Barn, where Kentuckians go to celebrate life. Cheers!
Limestone Farms bourbons are like a secret portal to a world of rich flavors where high proof meets smooth satisfaction. Every barrel is meticulously crafted and blended with a specific message in mind. Experience clean delineated flavor profiles that will have you engaged from the first sip to the final drop, making your palate beg for just one more taste. Limestone Farms, bringing heritage home.
Bourbon Life listeners, we have a very special announcement. Penelope Bourbon has officially re-released their massively popular Rio Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Named one of Breaking Bourbon's best finished whiskeys of 2023, Rio quickly sold out last year. With a double cask finish of American honey and Brazilian oak and a spicy cinnamon palate, there's nothing quite like it. Let Rio transport you to the land of Carnival. Visit PenelopeBourbon.com to order your bottle today. There's something different about Lexington, Kentucky. Something you can't quite put your finger on. The source of this magic? Limestone. It gives our native spirit an unmatched purity that will keep you coming back for more. But bourbon this good, from a place this beautiful, is too wonderful to keep hidden away. So come visit and see why Lexington is Bourbon Land. Brought to you by Visit Lex. Plan your Bourbon Land adventure at visitlex.com.
Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me here tonight in the Bourbon Life Studios, it is my good friend, Matt. Matt, how are you doing out there in the Bourbon Life Studios?
Mark, I am doing great out here. How are you doing there? Mission Control, Houston, everything looking good?
Yeah, man. You know, I got the cool mood light behind me going blue for the cats. You know, I won't talk about the whole coaching situation here at UK that's going on right now, but we just lost our coach. Trying to get another coach, but I still... got the blue light on. So, but I'm not going to bore everybody else with the details.
Yeah, right.
Well, anyway, I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole, Matt. We're talking about bourbon, not basketball, right? But we could do a podcast about bourbon and basketball.
I would have very little to say on that podcast. That is not my wheelhouse.
Not your wheelhouse. No. Yeah, well, I'm an armchair coach, I think, at times. I think most Kentuckians that, born and raised in the state are like that as well. But we'll leave that one alone. But we are the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by Liquor Barn. We appreciate their support. We appreciate the support of all of our sponsors. We couldn't do the show without them. And so with Matt, with that said, would you like to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
Absolutely. Joining us tonight, joining you all this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whenever it is you are getting your Bourbon Life fix, we have the Chief Brand Officer and Senior VP of International Sales at Blackwood Distilling Company here in Woodford County, Kentucky, Zach Johnston. Zach, welcome on to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Hey, welcome, guys. It's great to be here, and I've spent a lot of time with Mark drinking a lot of whiskey, and glad to do it here in podcast format.
Yeah, man, it's great. Zach, you're one of my favorite guys in the industry to run into, and it's always fun just because it's like so random, different places that we'll see each other at these different events, but you're always just a friendly face. So I always enjoy it when I get to run into you. Bourbon Classic seems to be one of those places where I run into you, and get to see you and do those events and things, but also at other different random things that just kind of pop up. And there's Zach. So it's always cool to get to see you, man. So I'm happy to finally
Likewise.
get you on the show.
Yeah, likewise, man. It's always good hanging out and drinking good whiskey with you.
Yeah, man. I appreciate that very much. And we are going to be drinking some good whiskey tonight. We've got some Blackwood here tonight. So we've got some bourbon poured up. Zach, would you care just to kind of share with everybody what we're going to be drinking in this first and partially in the second round as well?
Yeah, so this first pour is Blackwood Toasted Bourbon. This is our batch 3. It is a Kentucky straight bourbon, of course. It's around 7 years old, and we bring in the barrels, and then we transfer the liquid over to some fresh toasted barrels and give them just a little touch of that extra oomph before we put the batch together and bottle it. This is, it's classic bourbon from, say, a bourbon area south of Louisville. I'll leave it at that.
All right.
Might start with a B. I don't know. Yeah, that's
yeah.
You know how it is in this industry with NDAs. You're supposed
those
to
damn attorneys, right? Those damn attorneys, man.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a good Kentucky bourbon. It's a classic. And if you go on the website, BlackwoodDistilling.com, we put the mash bill, we put the year, we put everything we can there. So, we're trying to be as transparent as we possibly can, because, we are building towards a bigger brand than just a sourcing brand. So I can't really go into any of that yet, but hopefully we'll come back, and when we make that announcement, we can talk about that future. But in the meantime, we can talk about this bourbon, because, one of the things with whiskey and bourbon, I come from a very long whiskey background, going back into the early 2000s. And, there's some bourbons that just kind of stick with you. And I like this one, man. Like, it's just one of those things where the toasted nose or the toasted aspects aren't overdone. You get some, and they get kind of that bitter woodiness. They turn it a little bit into like the dirt underneath a firewood pile. And I find with this, you get a little bit of funk on the nose, but it's more like a barrel house funk, if you know what I mean. It's not cedary, it's not piney or dank. It's more like you're walking through an old barrel house. And that's what I sort of love about whiskey like this on the nose. Yeah. Is it takes you somewhere. And then you get those more classic, like you get that little bit of dark cherry tobacco, you get that little bit of clove, allspice, Christmas cake thing going on, maybe a little rum raisin, maybe a little bit of a cobbler or vanilla. So it's got complexity to it without being overdone. Like I like a subtle bourbon personally. Like I don't need a big, huge, like blow your face off with one direction. But this is, and it's got a really nice even keeled proof. It's 118.6. Yeah. So it has some oomph to it, but it's not going to buzz out your senses. It's not going to numb your tongue. It's not going to numb your nose, but you will feel a little bit of that Kentucky hug in there when we get to it.
Yeah, that's funny, man. Because I was just sitting here thinking, as you're giving your descriptors, which are excellent, of course, and I'll give it to Matt. I usually throw it to Matt first, and like he blows it out of the water.
Matt doesn't have a whole lot to add to that, I think.
Yeah,
Zach
like
really stole the show. It took it right out of us there.
Yeah, that's great, man. But I was like nosing this, and I'm like, I keep looking at the proof I had written down. I'm like 118.6. I'm like, wait a sec. I mean, like, that doesn't seem right. At least on the nose, I don't pick up that overpowering type of ethanol. Like sometimes you get on those higher proof bourbons, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's that just goes to the quality of the team when we're blending the whiskey. So, in case you don't know, like. The team behind Blackwood is Justin Thompson and Justin Sloan from House of Bourbon in Lexington and Louisville. And then also Guinness McFadden, who owns Blackwood Farms, where our name comes from. And he's an old wine guy from California. He won the Derby in 2019 with Country House. Yeah. And they have excellent palates that, know whiskey very well. And when you look at the Justins, JT and Sloan, they've tried the best of the best throughout the decades, right?
Sure.
So, and I think that sort of comes through in this, in that, their palates are tuned to a very fine and quintessentially classic Kentucky bourbon. When you're talking about, the old Granddad 114 that was made at National before Beam took it over, or the old Fitzes from Stitzel Weller from back in the 60s, or even the original Pappies from Stitzel Weller, or the old school Wellers from pre Buffalo Trace and what it is today. Right. I kind of get a little bit of the heritage of those in here, especially on the nose, with that that little hint of barrel house funkiness. And so if you're looking for something like that, I think this is a good place to start because you can actually get this. The price is in the mid 100s. This isn't cheap bourbon. This is an elite product because these are small batches, like truly small batches. We're talking, handfuls of barrels here. I think, in fact, on the back of your bottles, there should be bottle numbers. So on my bottle, there are 1,500 bottles in this batch 3.
Yep, 1,500 bottles. Bottle 109 is what we have here. So,
nice.
Yeah.
So again, we're not doing, small batches that are, 350 barrels here. We're doing, pretty concise. And for me, I was in media for 8 years as a whiskey critic, food critic, travel writer. Before that, I was in the high-end bar industry, working in Victoria Bar in Berlin, making cocktails, bar backing, cutting ice, doing all the things that you do in a very high-end cocktail bar. Worked a little bit at Rum Trader, which is another iconic bar in Berlin, again, cocktail side. And before that, I was heavily into whiskey. I got into whiskey in Scotland, actually, with my father-in-law introduced me to Talisker 10. And that was back in, I want to say, 04, 05.
Wow. Okay.
And I had, like probably most of us, I had been into bourbon before that. I was college. I'd get a handle of Austin Nichols, for $9.99 as you did back in those days, or things like that. But never really was a connoisseur until I got into Scotch around 04, 05.
Yeah.
And then I was, a big acolyte for Talisker and those subtly briny single malts that you get from the islands of Scotland. And then around 07, I was very fortunate that my best friend when I was living in Los Angeles was the manager of Vendome Liquor on Riverside in Toluca Lake in LA.
Okay.
And so he would lead tastings, like I'd be working at Universal Studios and he'd lead tastings, and then we'd meet up afterwards to, play cribbage and, pluck at a guitar or whatever. And he would bring back the open bottles that they used that day. And this was 07, 08 or 07. And so like a lot of those bottles, this is a very high-end liquor store, would be A.H. Hirsch, Black Maple Hill, Happy, Blanton's, all these things that at the time were $69 a bottle or $89 a bottle or maybe $109 a bottle because they were high-end, but in no way secondary market priced. And so we'd sit there and we'd kill a bottle of, A.H. Hirsch or Black Maple Hill without really thinking about it anything other than like a nice bottle of wine. Because back in those days, that's how you thought about it. It's like, I'll pay $60 for a nice bottle of wine. I'll pay $80 for a nice bottle of bourbon. Like you really wasn't anything beyond that. So I sort of shifted my palate from Scotch to American whiskey through that experience over that year of just drinking an insane amount of very, very good bourbons. And also he would give me a sort of education, right? So he would explain to me like, these are the bourbons that the people who make all the whiskeys you grew up with, these are the bourbons they actually love to make. These are the bourbons they care deeply about. These are the bourbons they sweat over and they fuss over and they argue over. And that's what makes these bourbons special. And at the time, that's why they're a little bit more expensive. And so, I kind of got the foundation then, of how important the people were behind the whiskey as opposed to it just being something you see on the shelf that's sort of almost, I guess, parasocial would be the term they'd use today. But, it became very evident that, that there's more to American whiskey or Scotch whiskey or any whiskey than just putting juice in a barrel and then putting that in a bottle. People actually do care deeply about this stuff. And that fascinated me greatly. And then, sort of my life in spirits went on from there, as I mentioned, cocktails, and then 8 years in media where I was a freelancer at Uproxx and became the drinks editor, helped Steve Barmucci, who's an amazing managing editor, who's now partial editor-in-chief and creative director over at Uproxx, helped him build out the life section, especially on the drink side. And he was an amazing champion for me and really helped me develop as a whiskey critic and understanding how to instead of how to serve whiskey, how to talk about it, in a sense where, thinking about the sensory details and thinking about, explaining something to somebody who doesn't know what this is. And also, what we did at Uproxx, and we had very, I want to say strict rules is the wrong way to say it, but they were strict rules where we would never, ever, ever write about something we didn't taste or I didn't taste.
Right.
We would never copy and paste tasting notes. They'd always be from one of the writers or me, and we'd never copy and paste press releases. We'd always talk about it in an original way. And so we were able to sort of build a online presence around lists that were kind of anti-lists, you know what I mean? Where everything on the list was a single bottle review that was original, which you didn't, 8 years ago in 2015, 2016, you didn't really see that. You saw single bottle reviews, of course. Obviously, Fred Minnick and Breaking Bourbon and all that was already up and running and more than successful.
Sure.
But, and then there were just like regular lists that you saw in like Men's Journal where it was like, hey, Evan Williams, $11.99, Jack Daniels, single barrel, $47.99 with like a 1-sentence blurb from the press release. Right.
Right.
And so we sort of tried to push the envelope there and really create a space where you could talk about spirits, but whiskey especially in a very succinct and deep way, while still managing to work in the reality of online media in the 2010s and 2020s, where SEO does matter and advertising matters, and you have to somebody's got to keep the lights on, right? And so we were able to find that balance where we could really maximize SEO and get millions and millions and millions of views on pieces. And, I was getting tens and tens of millions of views a year with millions of uniques and, really pushing the envelope in what could be done in whiskey criticism on a non-whiskey site to boot.
Yeah. And that's, to me, Zach, that's the one thing, and I hate to cut you off there. I was just going to tell you, the one thing that I just admire about you is the fact that you're so down to earth, you're so approachable, but you're one of the most respected guys out there that had done that. In that space. And the way you do it was unique, very unique. And just being around you and being around the people, and following you on Instagram as well. I can see the amount of respect that people have for you and what you did in that space. And I think that's very unique. And I think it's something very special that you were able to do, man. So that's one of the reasons, like I said, other than the fact you're just a nice guy, but I love the way that, you've done what you've done in that space, man. It's been really great to watch. So
I think with anything, it's knowing what you're doing. Like, I'm not a journalist. I'm not trained as a journalist. I've never worked as a journalist. Like, I don't consider myself that at all.
Right.
Like, I'm a whiskey critic. I write about whiskey, tasting notes, and I judge whiskey. Like, that's it. It's got nothing to do with journalism. There are amazing whiskey journalists out there. Aaron Goldfarb, Brad Jaffney, Maggie Kimberell, like Jonah Flicker, on and on and on, who are writing about the industry in amazing ways. If you want to talk about the business or the history or where it's going, follow those names because they're doing amazing work. And a lot of them aren't reviewing bottles. There's lines blurred there, of course, where does Fred Minnick fall and all that? I don't really know because he reviews bottles online as an influencer more now than anything. But, it's sort of, I think the most important thing in this industry and sort of like why I switched over to the industry side from the media side is you got to know who you are and where you belong. And if you know that, you can succeed and you can excel. And, my road in media, while great, and I have a great adoration for the colleagues I have at Uproxx, had at Uproxx from top to bottom. It was just time to, take all my years of work, whether it be, drinking Talisker in Scotland with my father-in-law or learning about bourbon in Los Angeles in the mid-aughts or, all the years I spent working in the industry in Berlin and the high-end bar scene and those competitions and BCB and blah, blah, blah. It was time to take all that and put it together and move it into, something where I can, have an effect on a whiskey and I can, bring something to people that's actually tangible because, the internet turns off tomorrow and all my words are gone. But, hopefully, you wake up on Christmas Day and somebody's left this under the tree for you and you drink it for the rest of the year, that's real.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. Let's kind of a great segue there. But before we do that, Matt, I should have asked you in terms of tasting or nosing notes. Was there anything you wanted to add that you picked up on the whiskey?
It has, Zach kind of mentioned like a decades old nose to it. Kind of brings in some of those dustier flavors, kind of like that like really sweet cracked corn to me. I almost pick up like a corn chip or like Frito chip with it as well. Butterscotch sweetness as well on it. But Zach, I think you coined it really well, sort of those aromas you get like walking through the rick house, kind of the old wood, not like the funky earth notes of it, but just has this really dark, really rich note that just brings back like memories and some of the older things that I've had, some like almost, to me, it kind of reminds me of like some old Four Roses on the nose a little bit, like some Four Roses from 70s or 80s. Like some of that,
I can see that.
Some of those older products, just beautiful nose, like you were saying.
Like kind of like a modern day Dusty. Mm-hmm. How's that? We'll call it that. So Zach, let's kind of transition to that. We're close to the end of round one, but I think we can kind of jump forward now. I appreciate you sharing your background, what you've done. Like I said before, it's super impressive, everything you've been involved with. Now you're with Blackwood. You're in this role as Chief Brand Officer, VP, Senior VP of International Sales. Can you talk about that, what that means, how you're transitioning from what you were doing before into this role, and what that looked like for you now?
Yeah. So, one thing I got a great education on, writing about thousands of whiskeys a year, was understanding the way brands work and understanding the way, people interact with them. Right. And that's say what you will. I don't say this bragging, but it's a valuable commodity to have. Mm-hmm. And especially in the spirits industry, because there's so much out there. There's something, like I always like to say, there is something for everyone out there. You just got to find it, right? And sometimes you need a guide to find it, because if you're just poking around in the dark, you may never find it, because there is so much out there. I mean, we can go to Total Wine or Liquor Barn or Benny's or Specs or Bevmo or wherever, and you walk down that whiskey aisle, American whiskey aisle, not the Scotch aisle, just the American whiskey aisle now, and it is daunting, right?
Sure.
So when you're looking at a brand, and my sort of ethos and why I connected with Guinness so well was, keep it direct. Like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You need to be true to who you are. And, this is a luxury product. This is a high-end elite whiskey. These are what we're drinking today. These are LTOs. These are limited time offerings. These aren't our everyday. And because, Guinness McFadden wants to expand the brand, he brought me on to do exactly that. So we're going to be releasing some new expressions under the brand that are going to be, full-time products that you can get on premise and off premise. Mm-hmm. We're going to be looking at a price range under $50 for, something that you can make cocktails with.
Okay.
Down the road, we're going to be looking at a price range that's closer to 30 that you can, use for rail drinks in a dive bar, and things like that. So the idea was, I have a very deep bar background, so I'm focusing more on making a version of this where, high-end bartenders are going to like to use it in their cocktails, and it'll be economical for them to use it in their cocktails. So a lot of the work I'm going to be doing is traveling around, going to festivals and industry shows, trade shows, and then bars, and, digging deep into my Rolodex of bartenders and bar owners, and, getting us in bars and getting us on cocktail menus and getting us, in on premise in, more luxury department stores internationally, like, Cadive or Harrods or Lafayette or Cordel Inglés and things like that. And then, there's, I've lived, I didn't mention this, but I lived abroad for 20 years, 14 of those years in Berlin. I traveled the world extensively, almost 100 countries. A lot of my travel was based around food and drink and really experiencing that stuff. And so my palate is pretty varied, put it like succinctly. And again, I'm not trying to boast or brag, but it's like, I'm in my mid 40s and I've been all over the world, so,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and I've never been afraid to try anything. Like my grandfather taught me well in that always try everything twice in case the first guy fucked it up. So, and I live by that to this day.
Yeah, that's nice.
And
I like that.
Yeah, and so part of why I was brought on was for that as well, to sort of bring my palate to the crew. Like I said, JT and Sloan Guinness, they have amazing palates already. They're doing amazing work to begin with. So to be part of that is quite an honor, in my opinion, because I respect them greatly. And so working on these next expressions we're going to build under Blackwood is it's an honor to be asked to be part of that. In my humble opinion. And then, sort of my international experience in the spirits industry is another reason they brought me on, just because I know the people, I know the distributors, I know the importers, I know,
Right.
I know who's, cheekily holding on to some Heaven Hill product in France, and who's holding on to some Beam product in Germany and things like that are sitting in totes and haven't been bottled yet. And
Nice.
I know where to poke around in the dark and find some interesting stuff. And so, there's just, and let's be frank, guys. I mean, there is a correction happening right now in bourbon. You're seeing some people selling off a lot of their barrels. You're seeing a lot of prices slashed in liquor stores. But you're also seeing more and more consumers, right? And more educated consumers, and people, starting from they're not starting from go anymore. They're starting from fucking, New York Avenue on the Monopoly board when they get into whiskey. So, they don't have to quite make the same mistakes and spend the same amount of money making those mistakes as they did even 5-10 years ago, much less 20-30 years ago. So with that savvy consumer coming on the horizon that we're already seeing, and also just the fact that, hey, if, these people there's so many people putting down hundreds of thousands of barrels a year now, just in Kentucky, much less Tennessee and
Sure.
everywhere else. You got to look internationally if you want to survive. Like, it's period.
Yep.
Like, it's, if you don't have an international play, you're going to be, it's going to be hard to give away those barrels, much less sell them.
Yeah.
And so we're just looking to expand the brand beyond, Kentucky, beyond just, a sourced product, that is an LTO, to being something that's on bar shelves, store shelves, and in people's hands. And like I said, what we're drinking today, this is batch number 3 of our bourbon releases. It is an LTO. It's a special release. It's, it's 179. And so you get this for a special occasion, you know what I mean?
Right.
And there's plenty of space for that, because there's plenty of people who love good bourbon. And, looking at the international market, asking $250 for a bottle of whiskey isn't crazy.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to look at through a Scotch lens or a Japanese whiskey lens, there are regular bottles that are released that are $300-400.
Yeah.
And so bourbon hasn't even gotten anywhere near that yet. Yes, we have a secondary market where prices are inflated on $99 bottles or $129 bottles. And yes, of course, there are $249 bottles and $300, like, those all exist. I know there are $499 bottles too that are the MSRP. But, we're barely scratching the surface of those super elite Scotch and Japanese whiskeys that are selling for, thousands, if not tens of thousands. Yes, I know Eagle Rare was $10,000 last year, and I know. Michter's Celebration is a few grand. Like, I know those, but those are so rare,
right,
compared to the overall industry.
Yeah.
Like, what was the most expensive Jim Beam release ever? Like that Father and Son for $250.
Yeah.
And so that's wild. And I'm sure Fred and Freddie have some barrels in there that are, 20, 25, 30 years old that they don't know what to do with, that they could drop for 30-40 grand tomorrow if they wanted to.
Oh, yeah.
And so, there's a lot of space. Yes, there's an industry correction. Yes, there's a bubble. That's everything. That's economics. The point is, why I like working with Blackwood and people like Guinness is staying even keeled and not, not getting overexcited when there's a correction, not getting overexcited if there's a downturn, but like seeing the opportunity in that.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, if there's a correction coming, that means people are getting savvier, and that's when you get savvier and you offer them something that's better. And so that's sort of, yeah, that's sort of our ethos, and that's sort of how we ended up kind of working together in this sense, because, not that I had a cushy job, but I had a nice job with Uproxx. Like I wasn't looking to leave. They called me, sort of thing. So,
yeah,
when I look at Blackwood, that's what I like about it. Plus, it's a celebration of Kentucky through and through. Like, we're not gonna, like, when it comes to bourbon, we're sticking with Kentucky bourbon, and
Very
it's
cool.
about, like Guinness won the Kentucky Derby in 2019 with Country House, 65
Zach,
to 1 odds.
I'll tell you what, real quick, let's take a quick break.
Yeah.
And we can come back and start talking more about Guinness and the brand itself, if that'll work for you. Because I think that's kind of a good, you're kind of transitioning into that, talking more about the brand, which would be great to get into that on round 2, if that'll work for you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Awesome. All right, guys, let's take a quick break, get a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with more with Zach Johnston from Blackwood Distilling Company in just a minute. Bluegrass Distillers is a craft distillery with a passion for producing exceptional bourbon. They're committed to the art of distillation, using locally sourced grains to create a distinct and flavorful bourbon that captures the essence of Kentucky's rich whiskey heritage. Bluegrass Distillers takes pride in their small batch, hands-on approach, ensuring quality and attention to detail in every bottle they make, like their limited release 9-year-old Elkwood Reserve Bourbon, which is currently available for purchase at their brand new Visitor Center in Midway, Kentucky, their distillery in Lexington, and select stores throughout Kentucky. And with their new distillery slated to begin operation in spring of 2024, you'll be able to pick up even more exceptional spirits from them, like their wheated bourbon and their blue corn bourbon in the spring and fall. For more details and to plan your visit, check out their website at bluegrassdistillers.com.
Hey, I'm Carrie Van Winkle coming to you from Pappy & Company, a brand I co-founded with my sisters and is deeply tied to our family's heritage. Our great-grandfather was the legendary bourbon pioneer Pappy Van Winkle, so we're all about honoring his legacy while reinventing those timeless traditions for our modern lifestyles. Our wide range of products reflect our family values and entrepreneurial spirit, from Pappy branded apparel to specialty foods, aged in our retired bourbon barrels, barware, and premium cigars. Just like our bourbon, we're dedicated to quality small batch production and infusing those elements of joy into daily life. Exclusive to listeners, we're offering a 15% discount on your first order, so go to pappyco.com and use code BourbonLife15. Cheers!
All right, everybody, welcome back for round 2 of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me here live tonight in the Bourbon Life studios, it's my good friend, Matt. Matt, how are you doing out there in front of the fireplace?
Mark, I'm doing great. The fireplace is roaring. It is spring in Kentucky, but there's just a slight little chill in the air, so I'm happy to have the fireplace on.
Yeah, it's because we lost our basketball coach, Matt. But I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go.
Yeah, that's right.
Going to go
You're
there.
not going there.
Everybody's hearts, our hearts are cold and empty now because he's gone, and we're waiting for word on our new coach. Hopefully, by the time this comes out Friday, we're going to know who that's going to be. But again, I digress. I'm not going to go down that path. But anyway, we are the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by Liquor Barn. We appreciate their support, everything they do for us. Could not do the show without them. If you haven't checked out our special episode that we just did about 2 weeks ago, we did the Pappy BTAC raffle. We recorded on site there at Hamburg, which is right here where I live, basically, about a half a mile away.
No,
so we had a
where
good time
you
over
live.
there that morning. I do spend quite a bit of time up there. Man, but they got a great tasting bar, and Jonathan, the manager up there, man, just such a good dude. Matter of fact, he helped me get this bottle that we're going to start on midway through this second round. So I got to give them a shout out. But love those guys. We love all our sponsors, everything they do for us. Like I said, we couldn't do the show without their help and their support. So Matt, with that said, you want to tell everybody who's joining us tonight?
Absolutely. Zach Johnston is the Chief Brand Officer and Senior VP of International Sales with Blackwood Distilling Company. Zach, welcome on back to the Bourbon Life Podcast for round 2.
I'm glad to be back and ready to throw some more fisticuffs in round 2.
Yeah, man. I mean, Zach, you and me, we're big boys, man, and we could go a round or 2. We could arm wrestle it out or something. One of these days, we'll do that. We'll just throw down at an event and just have an arm wrestling competition, man.
I'm mourning Seth right now for Bourbon Classic 2024. It's going to be me and you in the middle, arm wrestling in all comers.
I think this is a great idea, man. Maybe we could do like a team arm wrestling, you and me versus the world, right?
Yeah,
that's it. Mark and Zach versus y'all.
Oh, hell yeah. Get the 80s hair metal playing in the background. We can go all night.
Oh man, I'm telling you, get me on some Sirius XM Hair Nation, Zach, and I'm good to go, man. Just all about it.
This
Anyway,
is
Matt,
quickly
we were just
turning
talking
into
about
that Sylvester Stallone movie, Over the Top, isn't it?
Over the
Yeah.
top. Turn my hat around backwards,
Get
man.
over
and
the
let
top.
you-
Over the top.
That's
Yeah.
it.
I'll start training now.
There you go, man. Woo. Start lifting those curls and everything, man. Getting ready. So, Zach, I'm excited you didn't leave after the first round. Thanks for sticking around. But I'm also excited just to have you here on the show, man. I've been wanting to do this, and I hate that I wasn't able to get you in your former capacity on the show, but I'm thrilled to have you here in your new capacity. And we are drinking this second round. We're finishing up. We talked in the first round about this Blackwood Toasted Bourbon. This is batch 3, coming in at 118.6 proof. Beautiful bottle, by the way, man.
Yeah, I love the label.
Yeah, really like that. We could talk about that here in just a few minutes as well. But Zach, you're kind of starting down that road. And I'm sorry I cut you off in the first round, but I was like, it's like perfect. Let's break here and let's jump back into that once we get back to it. But yeah, let's talk about the brand itself. You kind of told us a little bit about it in the first round, but can you go a little bit deeper and just kind of talk about how they started and everything?
So back in, I think I mentioned 2019, Guinness McFadden won the Derby. And then, he has a background in California wine. He's got a hell of a palate, and he, gone all in on living in Kentucky, has Blackwood Farms. He does a lot in the horse racing community, and became good friends with Sloan and JT out at House of Bourbon. And JT and Sloan sort of came to him with the idea of like, hey, why don't we do something together? And, Blackwood Distilling was born out of that back in late 2019, early 2020. And so 2020 came around and they started, gathering up some resources, gathering up some barrels and seeing what they could do. And they landed on having a toasted barrel finish because there aren't that many out there. It's a good place to stand out and really show off what you can do as a blender, and as a whiskey palate. Because obviously, of course, Michter's is the iconic toasted barrel finish with their rye and their bourbon. Now they have cast strength versions, which are fantastic. Short barrel has a toasted barrel finish. Well, MGP has a toasted barrel finish that a lot of people use. Penelope, short barrel, etc.
Right.
And you see it a little bit in the craft world as well, with toasted finishes. You could argue that Maker's Mark, one of their staves, is toasted. It's out there in the ether, but it's not something that is oversaturated. And that, I think as well, them being able to lean into toasted barrel really gave this bourbon the palate, the nose, the finish they were really looking for in their estimation of what makes a great bourbon. And 2020 they put together a little bottling line. They got some barrels in a barrel house, and we have a little barrel house in Versailles.
Oh, okay.
That we're still using today. We're basically we put together a single barrel program as well. And so if you go to Railbird, there'll be a single barrel Blackwood there this year and last year as well. We're doing single barrels with some other friends of ours and things like that. So that's going to be becoming more prevalent, especially in the next months. JT, Sloan, Guinness, they put their heads together and they created this, as a team. And from there, of course, with JT and Sloan, they also have House of Bourbon, which is a whole business in and of itself that takes a lot of their time, right? And so Guinness sort of kind of took the lead on the distillery, on Blackwood Distilling, and they still all work together. I worked with Sloan too. Like we were together yesterday working on some plans for an international play. Yeah, some things, and they're still 100% involved. Blackwood originally was launched at House of Bourbon in Lexington and Louisville. Right. So it's available on Bourbon Outfitter, which is associated with House of Bourbon as well. and so it was very much launched as a brand via House of Bourbon. But now we're across Kentucky already, and now we're moving on beyond the borders of Kentucky. So, it's not that we're going to lose the idea of House of Bourbon from it, but that was its original home. That was
Right.
That's where the baby's first crib was. It was in that house. And so, and luckily we have, Justin Sloan, you were talking to somebody who's been in the business pretty much his whole adult life at this point, has an amazing, amazing palate, has an amazing understanding of the industry. And so, working with him has been a great pleasure, because I like working with people where there's no nonsense, no bullshit. It's all,
Yeah, right.
it's not, we all understand who we are, and, we understand what our goals are and how to support each other to get to those goals. Right. What's imperative about Blackwood is it remains a Kentucky product, the bourbon. And so, as the brand officer, like, part of what I have to do is protect the brand as well. So making sure that we find the right whiskeys in the short term for us to use for our next releases that are quality Kentucky products that, really highlight the state and the bourbon, the amazing bourbon that's made in this state, but also advance the brand of Blackwood in a way that makes sense to the palate that Justin or JT and Sloan and Guinness have already created, right? They built the foundation for this house to be built on. So, if the house doesn't fit the foundation, you're kind of fucked at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, working with that and, that all coming together, obviously it's Blackwood Farms, that's Guinness's farm where his racehorse comes from. So as you see with the label leans into the classic Derby themes. You got the roses there, you got the laurels, you got the horse, Kentucky houses on there with a number, and it's a very much in my opinion, iconic Kentucky product. Like, if you saw this on the shelf, this is from Kentucky, right? Like, nobody's going to confuse this for a Tennessee whiskey by just looking at it. Nobody's going to confuse this for an Indiana whiskey by just looking at it. And so, that's why the label is so important for us and sticking with that. And that really does come down to that original team coming together and really sort of giving that iconic Blackwood look to this label, with the horse. And also, Woodford County, obviously very much associated with two things, bourbon and horses.
Right.
So, it's not like it's a brand that has no association with either of these things, right? Like, you and the three of us could start a brand tomorrow and put a horse on it in Kentucky, and it would probably sell a few bottles because that's so iconic here, but we got nothing to do with that shit, right?
Yeah.
like we don't own, we're not lucky enough to own, stables where famous racehorses go.
Yeah, Kentucky Derby winner, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a verisimilitude here. There's an honesty here to this label. There's an honesty to this juice, and there's an honesty to this brand that I appreciate. Like, if anybody gets to put a horse on their bourbon in 2020, it's somebody who won the fucking Kentucky Derby and has a horse farm for Derby winning horses, right?
Oh yeah.
And so it's just a play for random brand, like a random branding where it's like, oh, it's a Kentucky bourbon, let's put a horse and a gun on it. It's like, no, this is something deep in the soul of these people's lives, right? This is his family. This is where his children are being raised, and he lives with his wife, and this is his family business.
Yeah.
And so it's treated thusly. And, it's, I really like the slogan as well. The pursuit is the dream. That sort of got me from the beginning. Cause I
was going to ask you, let's jump to the whiskey, cause we'll wrap this one up real quick with the palate and the finish on this. Matt, I'll throw it to you first and let you jump in on the palate and the finish on this one.
Lots of sweet fruit on it. A lot of cherry, a lot of those like older oak cherry notes, like barrel notes really come through. For me, there's that sweetness from like cherry or dark stone fruit. Like cherry pie comes through. There's kind of like a yeasty crust, like pie crust kind of flavor to it as well. Mark, you had mentioned something about coconut, and I think on the palate there's just like this, maybe the toasted barrel is imparting a little bit of that toasted coconut or toasted like fruit sugar on the palate as well. But nice heat Good long finish. Certainly not abrasive in any sense of the word at all, but definitely lingers. Drinks really well. A really, really nice product. Really beautiful palate.
Yeah, we definitely, and I think, Zach, I think you kind of mentioned this, alluded to it when we were talking about the nose. You talked about the proof point. We found it, I think, here on the palate and the finish, right? I mean, there's a little bit, you can taste it.
Oh, yeah.
Again, it's not overwhelming. At 118, it's not an overwhelming proof point to me. It's very nice, but you do get that nice hug on it as well. So,
it's there. Yeah, it's definitely there.
Yeah, Matt, I agree. Cherries, to the max. Just a nice, sweet, little bit of spice though, a little bit of rye spice in there as well in the palate for me. But I like that combination of sweet and a little bit of spice. Zach, what about you, man? What else in terms of the palate on that?
I mean, for me, it's just that kind of quintessential bourbon, right? Like, cherry, spice, a little bit of for me, like the toasted woodiness comes through with a little bit of like a tobacco chew. There's no bitterness to it. There's a round sort of almost like rum raisin thing going on deep in there. Kind of like if you're like Matt, you mentioned like dark stone fruit. Like, yeah, I think if you like stewed down some stone fruit and threw a little bit of baking spice in there, a little bit of raisin, and maybe threw a little crumble on top with a little cinnamon in it,
yeah.
But it's not like it's not overly sweet. Like it's not cherry candy or cherry Coke or anything like that. But it is fruit sweet, like it is fruit forward. And then that wood spice sort of comes in. And I feel like on the back end, late on the palate, you get a little bit of that toasted oak, but it's coming through less as a vanilla and more as like almost like a sugared clove, allspice, cinnamon thing. Like it's more like sugared spice than it is like classic vanilla that you would often get, from that like freshly toasted oak barrel that, sometimes when you get a freshly toasted oak barrel, you get those huge marshmallow flavors and those, especially if it's French oak, you get those huge vanilla flavors that are, creme brulee and all that. That's not really here at all. Like the toasted oakiness is more like caramelized spices, like winter spices for me anyway. And we could sit here and analyze this forever and probably get so deep in the weeds where we're talking about the cedar bark, man, and the blah, but at the end of the day, it just drinks really easily, especially for what is a 59.3 ABV.
Yeah.
There is, like I said, there's a Kentucky hug on that end. Like it finishes warm, but it doesn't buzz you out or numb you out. And I just got back from San Francisco where I tasted close to 300 whiskeys in 3 days, plus, a whole bunch of other stuff. I think about 350, 60 pours, in 3 days. And most of them were whiskeys. And I can tell you, man, like there are some bourbons out there that are at like 57, 58, 60 that just overdo it. Like you said, that ethanol comes out, it numbs your tongue so you can't taste anything, or you get that like buzzing where it sort of like vibrates out all the flavor. This is even keeled. Like, again, I know I keep going back to that word, but I feel like with JT and Sloan and Guinness, they understand that you need balance above all else.
Yep.
Like you can have whatever flavor profile you want because, hey, we all have different palates. We all look for different stuff, right? Like Matt, you grew up with the foods you grew up with. Mark, you grew up with foods you grew up with. I grew up with foods I grew up with. So we're going to have different palates no matter what, right? But there are, of course, continuities because we're all Americans that, we have similar things and blah, blah, blah. But still, that being said, there's something out there for everyone. This is for people who, and I think Matt put it greatly, like that old school Four Roses where it's kind of like funky, fruity, barrel house kind of thing going on. And I love that old stuff because it's unique, right? It's not just a cherry bomb or it's not just a spice bomb or, there's so many whiskeys out there that are just like taking a box of Red Hots to the face or taking a cherry Coke to the face. You know what I mean? And that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not decrying it. I'm just, matter of fact. This has balance, it has nuance, it has depth. it takes you on a bit of a journey, right? It's not the same note over and over again.
Yeah.
And it finishes really nice and warm. Like,
Yeah,
who doesn't want that nice warm hug?
So, Zach, we were talking about the Pursuit of the Dream before we jump back to the whiskey. So let's pick back up on that. So Pursuit of the Dream, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
So, I mean, I'm a old school travel writer guy, like very much a, always, chase your dreams sort of thing. And there's a funny, like, very quick anecdote. Like my step grandfather who passed recently, one of his sayings he always said is like, "Don't be a dreamer, live your life, go do it. Don't dream about it, go do it." And that always stuck with me. And so when I see the pursuit is the dream, the pursuit is life, right? It's going and doing. You can't pursue something without action. And so that really spoke to me from day one when JT first took me out to the barrel house out there in Versailles. I was like, that was the one picture I took was of that slogan. So this brand has spoken to me for a few years now, but it's just the idea of, go and do it. Don't dream about it, or dream about it, talk about it, but then go and do it, right?
Yeah.
Go and follow that dream. Don't just have it. Because what's the point of dreams if you're not going to fulfill them? And, maybe you'll fail, maybe you'll succeed, maybe it'll be a wash, but at least you had that pursuit. At least you have that drive. At least you had that journey. Right. And so, obviously, it'd be great if the success was winning the Kentucky Derby. That's a great success. But it's great to be part of that culture and that family. But in reality, it's something that drives us all. I think, Matt, Mark, you guys are doing this wonderful podcast and you're building something by pursuing something, right? Like, this is a dream that you're pursuing. I mean, it's a universal thing I think we all can understand. You don't just talk about it in your basement when you're drinking whiskey with your buddy. You're actually doing it. You're taking the time and you're putting the effort in, and, you're investing in yourself and each other and in this world. And I think that's something that, kind of gets lost is, it's not always internal, it's external as well. Like, I believe in the Kentucky bourbon industry. I believe in the people working in this industry. I know we mentioned Fred and Freddie No. Like, I believe in those people. Like, they are amazing people who are doing amazing work in an industry that is often kind of dismissed, if not maligned, as like, who gives a shit about Kentucky bourbon? It's, it's $9.99 on the shelf at the bar, and you take a shot and you chase it with beer. Like, there's a lot of people out there who still think that way, whether we like it or not. And, whether it be, Andrea Wilson and Dan McKee at Michter's, or, Bruce and Eddie and Jimmy Russell at Wild Turkey, or, the team at Peerless, or, us working out in Versailles in our little barrel house, we care about this product in this place, right? And that is, I think, the real dream. It is like giving this to the world because it's a great product. And look, I mentioned before, I love Scotch. I still drink Talisker all the time. I still drink peated Scotches quite a bit. And I drink unpeated Scotches quite a bit. And I love rye, but I also love bourbon. And I think, I moved to Kentucky to be part of this world and be part of this industry and be part of, this place in the sense of, because I wanted to celebrate it. I wanted to be in a place where something great is happening in the world of spirits. And, you have, whether it's the rolling bluegrass with the horses grazing and the beauty of the actual state physically, but also it's the beauty of the people. Like I said, it's the people behind these whiskeys that really make them so special and, I think, approachable. And,
Yeah.
Well,
we're glad you're here.
that's the end of my seminar, guys. You can buy my book for $39.95, and I'll see you in the funnies.
No, that's great, man. Well, let's jump back over to the rye here, because we're almost at the end of round 2 here. Or jump back over. Let's jump to the rye, because I think we're going to split it up that way. We're going to talk about the nose, but this is the rye whiskey, the toasted rye. Zach, you want to tell everybody a little bit about this one?
So this is our batch 2 toasted rye, 600 bottles. So again, we're talking very small batch here. We're not talking, 250 bottle run. Proof is 112.6. So we're inching a little closer, a little lower. Again, this is 95.5 Indiana, so you know where it comes from. I don't have to say it. But again, we pulled in these barrels. They're higher age statements, so we're looking at 6-7 years old, and then we're putting them in the same new toasted barrels that we use for the bourbon.
Okay.
Now with rye, we're talking a different beast here, right? Because it's just a different composition without getting too much in the weeds, in the molecular structure of what's actually in the distillate, right? You just have a different vibe going on. Like I said, I don't want to get too much into the science of it because it's boring. So the way the toasted wood interacts with rye is very different. It's also very different. Like when you add a few drops of water to this, it changes dramatically.
Okay.
And so like on the nose with this, like I get that sort of like bold red, fresh chili pepper vibe that's then like accented by a bit of like almost like smoldering oak. And then it's, for me, it kind of leans more into like dried herbs and things like that, where it's there is a sweetness in there, but the sweetness is so subtle. And those wood sugars are there, but they're just really way in the background on the nose. I'm getting those like bigger sort of like dry chili, woody, smoky notes almost. Like it's not smoked, don't get me wrong. But it's like almost smoldering, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like you take some dried chilies and you put them in a pestle and mortar with a little bit of like salt and oil, and you start like banging them out to like crush it up, and you get that like that little bit of life comes back to them with the moisture, so they get a little fresh again.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Matt,
it's a spicy nose.
Yeah, Matt, what do you pick up on it?
Well, the first thing I picked up was some similarities between the toasted bourbon. Came across kind of that barrel house note that you were talking about and referencing earlier, Zach. I think really came across first and foremost sort of the butterscotchy oak. I think the toasted barrel imparts a lot of the influence on that right away. And then for me, the rye really started to shine, and especially as it sat in the glass and it's had a little bit more time to air, I think the rye is really starting to come forward. I get a lot of herbal notes on this. This has some of the mint, a little dill. I'm getting picking up a fair amount of like really strong rosemary, almost like sage, almost like a burnt sage aroma to it. Just like really, really nice in like the really strong, not subtle herbs, but just like a big punch. There's of course the peppery, spicy rye notes on it as well. That bready note comes through with it too. But really nice, just a really beautiful nose.
Dude, you're preaching to the choir, man. Like that's so spot on. Like,
not much else I can add to those two experts right there, man. You talk about the chilies, and it's almost like a sweet chili sauce. There's like this sweetness that comes through, and that little bit of hint of spice that comes through. I'm almost picking up a little bit like of lemongrass kind of background as well on this one.
Ooh, okay.
To me, I kind of get that little lemony, but just not like lemon citrus, but like lemongrass kind of an aroma.
I can dig that. Yeah,
comes through to me on that one. But yeah, man,
it's funny again, and Matt picked up on this, but there is an elderliness to this nose, right? Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't like it's not a fresh young it's not a fresh young rye. Mm-hmm. And not that there's anything wrong with that either. If that's your profile, that's your profile. But this feels like it could be 12 to 15 years old.
Yeah,
like,
almost has like those leathery qualities that sometimes come through in a rye, where like funky in all the right reasons.
Yeah, I like that. There's a T-shirt for you. Funky in all the right reasons.
That's my next T-shirt for the Kentucky Bourbon Festival in September, nice. Man. Funky for all the right reasons.
Hell yeah, exactly.
Well, guys, we're at the end of round 2 here. Let's take a quick break, get a word from our sponsors. We'll come back and jump back on this rye again and talk some more with Zach Johnston, the Chief Brand Officer and Senior VP of International Sales with Blackwood Distilling Company, in just a minute.
The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise right here in the heart of bourbon country. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, Chef Kyle Klatka prepares amazing food each day that features an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. Be sure to check them out online at thestavekentucky.com or at Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky. Three Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The Three Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they called Perfectly Tuned Taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them together. Find out more about the whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.threechordbourbon.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me here live in the Bourbon Life studios tonight is my good friend, Matt. Matt, how you doing out there in the studio?
Good. I am doing great, Mark. I am with you here out in the studios in front of the Bourbon Life fireplace, having a good time. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Matt, you look really good tonight, dude. I switched the lenses on the camera. I put my lens on your camera and your lens on my camera in here, and you look like on point, dude. You got that f1.4 lens that's just like bokeh out perfectly in the background, man. You're just crisp and clear. I put the autofocus on your face every time you move. It's spot on.
It was so
man.
kind of you to AI an image of me the entire time so that no one actually has to see what I
Matt's
look like.
really not here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was my April Fool's, 2 years ago? I said, we're just going to start doing an AI generated podcast and we're not even going to be part of it anymore. It's just going to be the Bourbon Life AI podcast. So it's not really Matt and Mark anymore. It's just the AI generated versions of Matt and Mark.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get back to business here.
For real.
We are the
we've
Bourbon
got a
Life
great
podcast.
guest.
Well, hold on. I got to say that we're the Bourbon Life podcast. Come on. It's part of the contract. But we are the Bourbon Life Podcast, presented by Liquor Barn. We appreciate their support and everything they do for us. We appreciate all of our sponsors. Couldn't do the show, obviously, without all their help. Matt, now go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hey, no problem. We are super appreciative to have our guest, the Chief Brand Officer and Senior VP of International Sales at Blackwood Distilling Company in Woodford County, Kentucky, Zach Johnston. Zach, welcome on back for the final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast.
I'm excited to be here once again, and I'm excited to get into this rye because
yeah, man,
it's a tasty one.
Yeah, the nose on it's great. We've been sipping on it. We're going to jump into that palate and finish here in just a few minutes. You know, we were off camera talking a little bit, Zach, and you talked a little bit in round two or round one maybe about, you know, the international market, you know, and the experience there that you have, obviously, with your extensive background and the things you've done. You know, and we talk about with people, you know, what the bourbon market looks like and how things are growing and how things are, you know, expanding, especially internationally. I mean, can you kind of give your insight on that and where the market is headed with regard to bourbon on the international basis?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to start from a position that the sky is not falling, even if there's a downturn or a bubble or, you know, a correction. It's not the end of the world. Like what happened in the 60s and 70s to bourbon, and then the sort of, you know, the apocalypse of the 80s.
Yeah.
We're not going to go through that again. I mean, unless like the world literally falls apart, because just the consumer base is completely different now. The way you reach consumers is completely different now. You know, it's just a whole different world. Vodka sales are going up. That doesn't mean bourbon sales are going to go down if you think globally.
Yeah.
And, you know, you kind of saw this in 2020 during the pandemic, especially in the service industry and restaurants, where people were like, oh my God, how these restaurants are all going to close and what are we going to do? And it's going to be the end of restaurants. It's like, no, it's fucking not. Somebody's going to open a new restaurant tomorrow and that's going to fail too. And somebody's going to open another one after that and that's
Right.
going to fail too. Because that's the way
In the same
world
location,
works.
no less.
You know,
Yeah.
less, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right.
You gotta get that grandfathered in liquor license,
Yeah.
man.
It's the gold.
Yeah.
Man.
And so that's sort of my I guess if you want to call it my economic foundation, right, is to take things in a global view. And that was one of the reasons why, Guinness brought me on, was that I had that global view. I lived abroad since 2003 till 2022, so 19 years.
Yeah.
And I worked deeply in the spirits industry before I was in media. So like I'd already been to BCB, I'd been to Havana Club's cocktail competition, Bacardi Legacy. Like I'd done all that before I got into media and started writing about whiskey. And so looking at that, I also know what's on the shelves out there. I know where the shelves are. And, I also go to emerging markets. I was in China just before the pandemic, most recently, which is a huge burgeoning scene. I mean, especially places like Shanghai.
Yeah.
And, American craft beer tried to make a footprint there and sort of got pushed back simply because it was wrong time, wrong place. But now, I mean, you look at the Chinese market. I mean, I just got back from San Francisco and we had a whole panel of just Chinese whiskeys to taste for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that market is on the cusp, right? And so, it's obviously we talked a little bit about palate before where, we all have our own palates depending on where we grow up and blah, blah, blah. But, it's hard not to love bourbon because bourbon tends to be sweet and spicy, and those are universal flavors, right?
Right.
And cherries grow all around the world. Butter is all around the world. So a rich cherry caramel spicy bourbon is kind of a universal profile in a sense. I'm not saying it's absolute. I don't mean that as an absolute. I just mean a lot of people like that flavor profile.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you have the burgeoning market in China, you have the classic market in Japan, which kind of saved the bourbon industry in the 80s, especially,
Sure.
when you look at Heaven Hill and Sazerac and at the time Blanton's and all that stuff. But you also have a big market growing in Singapore through the cocktail scene. You have amazing high-end cocktail bars there that are doing some of the best work in the world, and they need good whiskey. Yeah. And it's hard to get that higher end bourbon over there because for decades there have been 4 companies that have sent whiskey abroad. It's been Heaven Hill, Diageo, Brown Forman, and Beam Suntory. And that's it. And so when you go into, Court del Inglés, or you go into Canevé, or you go into Harrods in Europe, those high-end whiskey shops with those department stores, you're going to see Eagle Rare 10, you're going to see a Jack Daniel's single barrel, you're going to see Booker's, and you're going to see a Heaven Hill product, maybe even a local one you've never even heard of in the U.S. But that's mostly it when it comes to American whiskeys. Oh, and you'll see Bullet, sorry. And that's it. And so when you go then to the bars, they're making Manhattans with Maker's Mark, Old Overholt, and Bullet because that's what they can get. And so you go into now because Sazerac has got their shit together abroad, you go into good whiskey bars and they're making cocktails with Eagle Rare 10. Yeah, they're making cocktails with Blanton's because you can get Blanton's there for fucking $59.99. Mm-hmm. And you can get Eagle Rare 10 for $35.
Yeah.
So you can make cocktails with it, right? So, and another great example is Chatham Imports. Michter's has really done well in getting a footprint outside of those big 4 huge conglomerations, right? And they've gotten onto shelves in cash and carries. They've gotten onto shelves in the elite whiskey shops, and they've gotten onto shelves in whiskey bars. And so they're a very good example of how a small family-run business can actually do it and get a footprint, right? And there's a whole bunch of details, I mentioned excise tax and bottle size is different and all that. We don't need to get in all that. The point is, making connections, working with friends, and having that real true connection with those people over there where it's like, hey, this is, what we're drinking here with this rye and this bourbon, like these are LTOs, these are pours that you pour at the end of the night. And maybe, you have 2 or 3 customers that are going to pay, the $35 to $40 it costs to pour these. But where you start is with a cocktail whiskey, and Michter's did this amazingly well with the Michter Small Batch and the single barrel rye and the sour mash and the unblended American, where they are priced correctly so that bars can use them. And that's the sort of key. You got to get into bars. You get into bars, you get people excited about it, you get them posting on Instagram, you get people talking about it, you get tourists talking about it. We're like, hey, why did I have a better American whiskey cocktail when I was at Rum Trader in Berlin or Super Lion in London or Atlas in Singapore than I get at home? And then they come home and they want to see it. And then, okay, then you get into duty free shops and you're in the high end whiskey shops, and you sort of build in that at the same time. Of course, you don't do one and then the other. You build in the same time. So when they do see that whiskey at the bar, and then they're waiting for their flight when they're at the airport at duty free, and they see it, they'll bring one home. Yeah. And then they bring one home, and then they have bragging rights. They're special. They have something you can't get in the US. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we all know one thing in bourbon is that people love to show off things they can't get otherwise. Mm-hmm. And then, once you build up that reputation, and you build up that mystique, and you build up that consumer base, then, you start bringing that stuff here. This isn't, again, I'm not making any of this up. This isn't my invention. Like, this is how Blanton survived. It's kind of how Pappy survived. It's kind of how Heaven Hill survived. Like, they made a huge push abroad in the 80s and 90s, and people were bringing bottles. People are still bringing bottles back to this day, from those releases. And so when you look at markets, like whether they're old school markets like Germany, Japan, Taiwan, or emerging markets like India, China, Mexico, Brazil, you have an opportunity in both. You have, an opportunity in Japan to really kind of almost be nostalgic for the 80s and lean into that as your marketing play. Whereas in Mexico, you have an amazing opportunity to introduce people to something great. Mm-hmm. And so, the amazing whiskey bars that are popping up in Mexico City right now, like, without giving too much away, like, that's where you need to go if you want to survive, because they're not going to stop drinking whiskey tomorrow because out of, like it was in the 60s or 70s. Like, this is something new that is growing, that is going to continue to grow. And then it's going to, it spreads to Costa Rica and Brazil and Argentina and Chile. And, you have all these markets with huge population bases that enjoy cocktail scenes, that enjoy spirits, that are opening up to whiskey and American whiskey in new ways. Now, obviously in the Americas, you always play it a little differently than you would in Europe, or you would in Asia, or you would in Australia, New Zealand. What's beautiful sort of about bourbon in the Americas is that it's a corn-based spirit. So when you're going into Mexico or Costa Rica or even, Argentina, Brazil, is you can lean into the fact that this is, maize is an American product. It is an American grain. And so, you have that local adaptiveness that you wouldn't otherwise have. It's rye, wheat, all that stuff's imported from Europe, the Columbia Exchange, blah, 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 without getting into too much history there. But, the idea of corn being a central part to high-end cuisine and bartending is really important right now in places like Mexico City and the Yucatan and Oaxaca. And so, it's a great time for bourbon to be part of that return to a lost heritage, but a heritage that has been kind of sidelined a little bit. Yeah. And so it's a corn product. I mean, bourbon is a corn product at its soul. Yes, there's malted barley and rye or wheat in there too, but it is it is a very clear corn product, right? In that it is without the corn, without the maize, you don't have bourbon, period. Yeah. And so, you lean into that more in the Americas, and like I said, in Japan, you lean into more of the nostalgia of it of the 70s and 80s, and in, places, London, Paris, Prague, Berlin, you lean into the cocktail aspect a little bit more because that's where you're going to see it a bit better. And then, you just, again, relationships. It's about, making friends and working with those friends because friends want to see friends succeed. And luckily I have a lot of friends in both import in spirits and in the bar industry that, we all, it's especially the bar industry. It really is a tight knit fraternity. Yeah. Because, you all do the same thing. It's like all going through the same hazing process, and you've all been in the same weeds, right? You're going through boot camp with these guys. And so, there's an instant recognition between bartenders at a certain level. And so, I am extremely lucky that I was taken in at Victoria Bar and trained by Stefan Weber and Beate Hindemann, who wrote an amazing book called The Art of Sophisticated Drinking, which you can get on Amazon. And it's a fantastic read with amazing recipes and a wonderful history of spirits and cocktails in there.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, and it's a very easy read as well.
Good.
Yeah. And so, and I was so lucky to have people like that support me and take me under their wing, in the same way that I was extremely lucky to have people like Steve Bermucci support me and take me under his wing, and Jarrett Meyer, who's the co-founder of Uproxx, really spend time mentoring me over the years in a way that, I couldn't imagine. It was like a doctorate education working with somebody like Jarrett Meyer, because, the way he thinks about business and the way he structures his day and the way he structures how he works and how he succeeds and achieves goals and things like that really allowed me to grow greatly beyond just, knowing what whiskey is or knowing what cocktails are or what beer is and things like that, and kind of put all that together into looking at the global market and being like, okay, where can we make a play with Blackwood? Where will we fit in? Where will we be part of something bigger and longer lasting than any of this? Because, we all know what's going on in bourbon in America. But again, going back to my original point, you can't have a sky is falling attitude. You can't be Chicken Little, man. You gotta be, what's next? How do we rebuild from the rubble? How do we take those exact same bricks and build something stronger and bigger and longer lasting?
Yeah. And that's, it's funny, Zach, because I've had people ask me, they're like, well, are we in a bubble? And I'm no expert. I'm not in the industry, right? I just observe and talk to people that are in the industry. And, I'm like, look, even if domestic consumption drops to some extent, I mean, there's so many, and I'm so happy that you just went through that explanation, because I was thinking, your European market, there's potentially China, there's India, but man, you just like opened up all these other doors that I hadn't really even thought about. So that's just really cool to get that. I feel like I got educated tonight, Zach. So I appreciate that very much. Hey, let's jump back over to this rye whiskey here, because we're getting close to the end of round 3. And I want to make sure we get to talk about this palate and the finish on this toasted rye. Matt, what do you pick up on the toasted rye?
It is big and bold. That's for certain. I really love the mouthfeel on it, because the mouthfeel helps to convey the flavor that's coming across. Sometimes the mouth will be just a little thin. Sometimes it's almost like too oily, and it just feels like your mouth is just coated with butter or like fat or something, and you can't get a lot of flavor through. But this brings a lot of the flavor in the mouthfeel. Big and bold, spicy, lots of peppercorn, baking spices, a little bit of clove, not just black peppercorn. There's like white peppercorn, red peppercorn, just a really, really nice, bold flavor. Those grassy herbal notes come through as well. There's some of that dill, that rosemary plays a little bit on it. And then the toasted oak, that's sort of been the theme throughout this show and throughout this evening, of like those older flavors coming through. I think some of that toasted oak really brings sort of that funky aged note that in this case plays really well with this rye, because it lets the rye notes shine, but it also rounds them out somewhat, so it's not so rye dominant, especially on the finish. Sometimes an Indiana 95.5, those can finish pretty hot and pretty one note with lots of peppercorn and cinnamon. And this, I think the toasting on it in that secondary barrel really helps to shape it and round it out a lot more, so that you're not just getting like burned out on the finish. It's also got some lingering oak, some toast, sort of those creamy creme brulee, type sugary notes down the line.
Yeah, I like
absolutely.
that, Matt. That's a very good point. With the finish on it, you talked about the fact that there's a lot of that spiciness to it, but it's not overwhelming, and there is that sweetness that combines with that as well. The finish goes on for quite some time, no question about it, man. But I can't really add much more in terms of notes, obviously, to what Matt said. Zach, what about you, man? You've obviously got some things to throw in there, so.
I don't think I can beat Matt, man. He's got an amazing palate. But I just agree. I mean, there's sort of I like how the toasted barrel, those toasted sugars come through, and Matt used creme brulee and that like light bulb over my head. It is that sort of like creamy creme brulee with a little bit of like the sort of sugar that's been caramelized, but it's not buttery or fatty. It's kind of lush and soft and almost a little silky, creating that mouthfeel. The mouthfeel is really what drives this whiskey so well. But yeah, it's balanced, takes you on a journey. You understand that it's a rye, like you get the herbal spice and all that's there, of course, but it just goes deeper, and it really, for me, it leaves me with a very subtle warmth. Again, we're talking 56% here, right. A very subtle warmth, but it really just leaves me with that satisfied feeling of having like a creamy vanilla dessert. And I think that's testament to those toasted sugars that come out of toasted oak that are more readily available, and the rye's more readily available to attach to them and sort of layer them into what you're drinking in the glass.
Yep. Can't add anything to that either. So Zach,
but again, Matt, you're so spot on, man. Like I tip my hat.
Yeah, Matt is my color commentary guy, man. There's no question
show
about
up
it.
For
Right?
about 5 minutes of show, and
he's the star of the show. There's no question about it.
The guest is the star.
So Zach, we're close to the end of round 3, but before I don't want to wrap it up. I want to talk about kind of the future things going on, what you guys have going on there. Kind of what the future looks like as well for you and the brand. Can you kind of go into some of those details? The things you can share with us.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I mentioned we're expanding. So we're going to be expanding outside of Kentucky for the first time into a couple of states, hopefully 4 states this year. And then also making an international footprint this year as well. We want to kind of get ahead of the game in case those whiskey tariffs come back. Looking at March 2025 when we'll know about that better. But and then it's just there are some big news moments that are going to be coming from us in the next few months that can't really talk about yet. But stay tuned. If you go to Blackwood Distilling Co on Instagram, you'll see it there. I'll make sure that Mark gets the press release for sure. But we're expanding the brand for a very good reason. Like this is well beyond just sourcing some great barrels from a Kentucky town that starts with B, and putting them in a toasted barrel and putting them in the bottle. This is a much longer play with a much more detailed plan than I think most people expect. Because again, our footprint so far has been LTOs that you get at House of Bourbon and online, and they're small batches. I mean, these are small batch releases. We're talking about hundreds, always hundreds of bottles, not thousands. And so, we've been quietly building our consumer base, our fans, and 4 years of doing that, we have a base who really cares about this whiskey, because we're putting out batches that are carefully designed by people who deeply care about American whiskey. And so that is the ethos that we will carry forward in whatever we do and however we grow and wherever we go.
Very cool, man. That's a great explanation. I mean, I love it. I'm excited to see where you guys take this and see where this takes you as well. Like I said, you're one of my favorite guys out there in the industry, man. So
you're too kind. You're making me blush.
No, man. But I'm serious about that. I'm excited for you. Every time you're around people, everybody knows you. People know. I mean, it's cool to be around you in an environment like that, because everybody knows Zach, and everybody enjoys being around Zach, man. So can you just take a second and tell us? I know you've had an extensive journey so far, and this part of it is just beginning for you. But is there anything that you can say so far has been like a favorite part of the journey for you so far?
Overall?
Yeah.
I was so lucky, like working in whiskey on the media side during one of the biggest whiskey and cocktail booms of since literally like the 1950s, 60s. I was so lucky to be part of that and get to experience all the things I got to experience, whether it be, distillery tours in Scotland or Ireland or Germany or the amazing people I've met in Kentucky and Tennessee and Texas and New York and Washington and California and Colorado and etc. We're all making beautiful whiskeys. I say the height is the most important thing. The thing that I carry with me is the people, meeting the people behind the bottles. That's meeting the people behind the microphones on the podcast, meeting the people behind the images on Instagram, meeting the people behind the liquid in the bottle. That's been the real highlight is the people, whether, of a million different personalities and a million different lifestyles and a million different whiskeys. But, there's something about the community that I think is really special. And I think that's been the highlight.
Very cool. Great answer. I mean, I don't think anybody could say that any better, Zach. I'm right there with you 100%. That's what to me, my little journey that I've only been on for 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's always the thing that stands out to me is just the people, the people you meet, the experiences you get to share with those people, man. It's just, there's nothing else compares to it. And it's hard to describe it to other people.
For sure.
But I mean, I get it. So
yeah, man, there are some amazing people doing such beautiful work in this industry. Whether it be making cocktail with a lovely craft gin, or it's somebody, like Freddie No, who's taken his heritage and, solidifying it for the next generation. There's just people doing amazing stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. So Zach, where can people find you if you're so inclined to share that information on Instagram, and then also information about the brand itself?
So I only do one social media, and that's Instagram. Yeah. And you can find me at ZTP Whiskey. Usually if you listen to this podcast, you probably have a few whiskey accounts you follow. So if you type in ZTP, I'll probably come up.
You're going to be the only one that comes up under ZTP.
Yeah. I post on there a couple times a week. I do more stories on there. So if you're, watching me over the last week, you would have saw everything at the San Francisco Wine and Spirits competition that we did there. And then, I'm going to be on the road quite a bit. So you'll see me on the road, and, where we're expanding to with Blackwood Distilling. And then, with the brand Blackwood Distilling Company, Blackwood Distilling Co. on Instagram. You can go to blackwooddistilling.com to sign up for a newsletter, put in your email, and we'll send you out, when we announce any new LTOs, announce any new expressions, announce any new expansions. We just are about to start doing a flight at Watch Hill proper. And so Josh put us on a flight there. So nice. If you happen to be in Louisville and want to go to an amazing whiskey bar, hit up Watch Hill proper and grab a flight, grab a pour, grab some very, very good food. And then, IG is probably the best place to follow along, to be honest, because that's going to be updated the most. So,
yeah, very cool. All right, Zach, any final thoughts before we wrap it up here tonight?
Matt, you have an amazing palate. It's great to drink with you, man, and share a couple whiskeys with you. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah.
Mark, again, you have an amazing palate too, and you're such a wonderfully, wonderfully nice person. And thank you so much for this invitation. It's been a really, really nice time spending this time with you guys.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up tonight?
Zach, what a show. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for taking the time, being flexible with us after we had some technical difficulties last night. Next time, let's do it in person so we don't have to worry about technology.
I'm in. Yeah, anytime.
I think that would be great. And see, I'm happy we got to do that tonight because Matt looks so good with that new lens on that camera, man. So it's like,
it's all the lens, not the guy.
Man, whatever, dude. So Zach, thank you so much for hanging out with us, man. I mean, I just can't say enough about how much I've enjoyed this. And getting to know you over the last couple of years as well, and running into you at different events, and just getting to spend some time with you. It's a lot of fun. Tremendous amount of respect for who you are, what you've done in the space as a writer, as a critic, but also just excited for you. I'm excited for this new journey, man, just to see where you guys take this and what you guys do with it. great product. Obviously, we've enjoyed what we've had tonight so much, and really looking forward to seeing how you're able to put your footprint on this product and the brand overall and see where it goes, man. So kudos to you.
Absolutely.
Congratulations. Can't wait to see you again in person. It'd be a lot of fun. Yeah. So, of course, we are the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by Liquor Barn. I do have to say that because I love Liquor Barn. And thank you, Jonathan, for helping me track this bottle down. I know you're out there listening, man. So thanks for helping me track down this bottle of rye whiskey. Appreciate that very much. We appreciate you, our listeners. Well, we appreciate all of our sponsors as well, but we appreciate you, our listeners. Like Matt always says, whatever time of day it is, morning, noon, or night, whenever it is, you get your Bourbon Life fix. We appreciate you taking the time out to listen to us. I mean, there's a ton of bourbon podcasts out there. We know that. So we appreciate you guys tuning in and hanging out with us for just a little while. You can find us, of course, on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. We have the private group, The Bourbon Lifers. So if you feel inclined, join us there. We'd love to have you in there. A lot of good conversations, a lot of fun going on there. You can email us at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you if you have suggestions for stories, for ways we can improve, things we could do, something you'd like to see us do as well. Just let us know. We'd be happy to do that. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. We would really appreciate that. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube. We are on YouTube now, so check that out as well. Subscribe, follow us there. We'd love that. Don't forget to check out Mike and Big Chief on The Whiskey Trip, which is a podcast, of course, comes out under our umbrella as well every Tuesday. Mike's doing a lot of fun shows on there, so check him out. Give him a follow as well on Instagram and Facebook. With that said, I'm going to wrap it up. Send us on with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.
Welcome to the kitchen table at James B. Beam Distilling Company, where every visit is a celebration of tradition and flavor. Did you know that the kitchen table is nestled right within the heart of the distillery? That's right. You can experience the essence of James B. Beam's legacy while savoring their delectable dishes. Join them every Wednesday through Sunday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. for a culinary journey like no other. Planning a special event? Let the kitchen table be your host, creating unforgettable memories for you and your guests. And don't miss their exclusive Behind the Beam tour and monthly Claremont Supper Club events, which will feature their Overholt special releases at the April 18th event. For more information and reservations, visit beamdistilling.com. The kitchen table at James B. Beam Distilling Company. Come as a friend, leave as family.